Okay, let's make sure we're good here. Just first time check-in. Make sure we're set. Get rid of email. Get rid of this guy. Okay, just the essentials. Okay, I guess we've been on for about a half hour, so. Well, I mean 30 seconds. So let's get to it, I guess. It's just weird that it's showing it as unavailable here. Maybe I'll check a incognito window. See if my face shows up. Okay, and it does. All right. Oh, and 2 people are here. Hello, people. How's it going? I wonder who they are. Feel free to drop something into this chat if got something to say. And in the meantime, we will get started. I just kind of wanted to test this out. Just doing a live stream is a way of kind of encouraging contribution to Spike ecosystem and bring a little more transparency to the way that I work on and maintain a lot of these projects. So feel free to shoot me any questions that you've got through the little chat in the corner or through Twitter. Either one should pop up and notify me, and I'll check periodically in case that's not the case. Okay, so today I just wanted to look at some of these plugins, and I had been speaking with someone who suggested that I leave a few more comments and make the code a little bit more clear, which I think is a great and very reasonable suggestion. So I was going to kind of go through and do a little bit of that. Also going to go through and fix somewhat of a long-standing bug in Spike Contentful, which has already been fixed in Spike Records. Very similar types of plugins, and that both of them are intended to go to a remote source, pull in some data, and make it available for rendering in your static templates. At the moment, I'm on the next branch here of Spike Records, so this has been updated to work with the next version of Spike, which is based on Webpack 2 and is in production already on a couple of sites, so it's exciting stuff. And so I'll also go through and kind of point out the process of converting up to use the next version of Spike. Probably we'll also go ahead and convert the Spike Contentful one, because why not? So start it off, I'm just going to go to a new branch called next, and we'll just open this up in Atom. You can see how brutal my startup time is. But, I tried really hard to improve it. Oh, great. Got followed by someone. Who knows who that is? So, yes. Let's see what we've got. Yep, so we'll need to boost the version here on this loader, and that should be it, actually. It does, oh, and also Spike Core and test. Okay, so let's jump into some code. First of all, I'm just gonna go through Spike Records and kind of explain what's happening in this code for anyone that's curious, because I think it's a nice, clean, fairly simple, and recently updated plugin. So it's a good example of how you can write a Webpack plugin that will hook into Spike to do what you want. So if you've ever written a Webpack plugin before, you'll know that Webpack plugins export a class, and Webpack hooks into a method in the class called apply. And it gives you the Webpack's compiler as a parameter to this method, which is great. And on top of this compiler object, they have a lot of hooks that you can use to get into the compile process and essentially jump in at a certain point in the process, do whatever you want, make modifications if you need to, and then let them know when you're finished doing your thing, and the compiler will cruise along. And there's a ton of different spots in their documentation, which I won't bother pulling up now, but I'm sure you can find that you're able to jump into the compilation process. Between Webpack 1 and 2, there are not very many, if any, differences that I have experienced so far in the plugins that I've upgraded as far as the hooks and how they work. So this should be similar between 1 and 2, at least the ones that we're looking at here. So not too big of a change there. Most of the changes that I've seen have been just internally in the code base. It's a lot more well organized now, and there are a few more contributors, which is great, and the config file is drastically different and is now validated. So we'll see all that in a minute. So we got this apply hook, and the first thing we want to do essentially is, as soon as possible, we want to grab the options coming into this plugin, which are essentially just a data source. So you can use a JSON file, you can use a URL, which it will resolve, or you can just pass in data directly. It's questionable when you would want to use this plugin, honestly, for a JSON file or pure data, because you can require a JSON file and pass it directly to your locals. And same with the data, you could have just put it on this object. And the way that it works generally is that you create your object here, and you pass the object to the records plugin, and the plugin will pull the appropriate data, and it'll append it to this object. And then also you pass that same object later on to your view engine, which for Spike is usually Reshape, and it will get the object that's been updated with the fresh properties, and it'll render it to your view. So you can see an example of how this happens. Let's say, I would have said in the tests, but the way the tests are set up is a little bit compressed. But I'll try to give you an example because it's important to understand the tests anyway. Since I'm doing the same thing in pretty much all my tests, which is compiling a project with a set of options and then kind of checking the results of the project to make sure that they compile correctly, I have this shortcut method called compile and check. And you can see that this is used in a lot of the tests here for Spike records. In addition to a method called config project, which is part of the compile and check. So let's go down into the source here to compile and check this out. And I could probably comment this out, but it's pretty clear what's happening here. It's just going to compile a Spike project and offer a callback hook to run your tests on the results of project. And it will do this with a certain set of defaults, which for this one is obviously using the records plugin, since this is the test for records. Let me just quickly check, see what's going on here. I don't know what this means. 3 people watching. We're yellow. Okay, viewers may be experiencing minor issues. Okay, well, I hope not. I hope that nobody is experiencing minor issues. It says I should use a stream bitrate of 1,000. Okay, whatever. If I'm this should be fine, I think. If I'm streaming at too high of a resolution. Okay, 3 people watching. It's exciting. Say hello. Feel free to say hello. Okay, cool. Looks like no issues. Great. Okay, so let's get back to the code. So what's happening here is up front we are running config project, which we've seen is kind of like a sub method of this. So let's go straight to what that is. And here we're taking in a couple of the options from this method. And honestly, I should have those documented. So usually the way I'll do this is using DocBlocker, which is a really nice plugin for Atom, and it's available for a lot of other ones, where you can essentially just do this little /**, hit tab to complete, and it'll give you this nice JS docs block. So I'll drop this description here. I want to make sure that this method is super clear, what it's doing and what types of options it accepts. When I was writing this, obviously I knew what the options were, so I didn't document it immediately, but that was a poor decision. I obviously should have made it more clear. A lot of the time I'm just trying to get these things out the door for immediate use, which is why I don't always have them super clearly documented. Although I'd like to say that the core is very clear and all the methods have good doc blocks. So configuration object here, and in JS doc, what you can do is essentially do this. So if you have a sub-property, I spent some time looking this up because I often will take a config object up front that essentially, if I just put this as the options, it's pretty much useless to anyone reading. So apparently this is the way you do it, and you just list it out down the line. So the fixture, let's reverse engineer what that is. Okay. I do know what this is. So the fixture here, you can see it being passed is data. And so for all my test fixtures, I have them all in this folder. And depending on what I'm trying to test, I might have a different set of files to test against. And right now I have just two, which are data and template. And so since these are all in the same place, I don't want every test to have to put together the full path for this individually. I kind of compress it down to just the unique data necessary, which is just this. And we know where the fixtures are. Up here, we can just join this path with that and get the root to the project. So back down in config project, you can see that that's exactly what's happening. We join the fixtures path to the fixture path, and we have the full path to the fixture. So this is name of the project folder inside fixtures. Cool. So that's good. Let's add another one. No, and that obviously is going to be a string. And I don't know why there's an extra space here. Okay. Let's go on to the next one. Locals. So this is going to be our locals object, which usually would just start out as a blank object. And what happens is it gets passed essentially to whatever plugins need to modify your locals. Locals being essentially variables available in your views. And those plugins will modify it along the route of Webpack's compilation. And then the view engine, which renders later on, then you're required to do the plugins. For example, run and watch run are two of the very most early plugin hooks for Webpack. So if you run your logic up here, then it definitely will be finished before it starts compiling. And you can go through the compiler hooks and kind of see where Webpack starts to do its compilation. Spike doesn't compile anything. It uses Webpack as its compiler 100%. Pipes every file through there, even though it generates a static site. This is different with Roots, which had its own full compiler, but it's lovely for me not to have to maintain that. So as long as essentially you have added your properties to the locals before Webpack actually compiles your views, then you're set. So the pattern we run into for this is that plugins will just take your object, you can pass the same object to your views, and then you're clear. This is actually redundant. I can just do this. That's a nice little JavaScript shortcut. If you do this, it will just do key and value back to this. It's essentially just an expansion. So nice convenience there. Not have to repeat yourself again. Okay, so let's drop that down here as the next. We'll just do objects, and this is locals. So object to be passed to view edge. Cool. All right. And config. So this is going to be the configuration object that is passed to Spike Records. Since all of these are using Spike Records, because this is the tests for Spike Records, it was an easy decision not to have every test kind of initialize it and pass it in. So you can see where that happens right down here. So it comes into compile and check as ops. And we pass it into the second param as ops.config. This comes in as records config, and then there it goes right into the plugin. So let's add this, and we'll say locals is an object. Okay, this is an object too. So config and object for records plugin. Okay. So let me check my thing and see if anyone's really bored or has left. Oh, wow, more people have come. Okay, this is great. Please let me know if this is boring or or you want me to talk about something different, because I'm very new to this. This is my first time doing it. Excited to be testing it out, and yeah, if there's anything else that you're interested in or should be doing, then just please let me know. Okay, but in the meantime, I will continue down this path. So config's done, and verify, this you probably can figure out pretty quickly, is essentially a callback. So once you're finished with the compilation, it returns the public path for convenience to let you read through the files that were in the output. And then you can run your tests and verifications here. So in this one, for example, we just read out the index file and make sure that the output matches a certain HTML string. And that's it. And it looks like this isn't even being used, honestly, which probably is a relic of past development, which is good that I caught and cleaned up. Right now, since I'm returning this, I have to assume that it does return a promise, as Ava accepts promises instead of callbacks. You can have it do a callback if you run this, and then I'd have to run t.end here, but nice and smooth returning a promise. So it looks like I did have a callback here previously, but I don't think that's needed anymore. It certainly isn't for this method, which doesn't utilize it anywhere. So let's go back down to here and check verify. So here's my ops. We took care of fixture, we took care of config, we took care of locals. Here's verify, and yeah, it doesn't look like it passes back the third param at all. So it was a relic of the past, and here is our returned promise. So this does return a promise. Okay, so let's get into verify. This is going to be a function, and essentially callback for when project has compiled. Okay, and I should also say that it accepts, it passes through, let's see, passes Webpack compiled results data and the project's public path, okay, because we get these two things. Okay, so that's a little more clear, and what we're returning is a promise. This is promise for completed compiled project. Cool. So that's a little bit more clear now, hopefully. And generally, I hope it makes sense of what's happening in this method. This is basically just a test helper. I started writing all of this out manually, and once I had done 3 or 4 tests, I was like, this is obviously too much repetition for a programmer to handle, and so I abstracted it out to here. And this ending piece is just a wrapper on top of rimwrap. I looked into packages that were like rimwrap that returns a promise, but a lot of them like required bunches of external promise libraries and had extra dependencies. So I just figured I'd wrap this up in a ES6 promise handler and leave it at that. So that works. So what it's doing is it's just compiling your project, and then it's going to run your verify function, make sure everything's good. And once the test is done, it will remove the public folder so that it doesn't conflict with further tests. Like, for example, if you were testing to make sure a file read as certain content, then you made a code change, and it actually didn't render the file at all. If you left the public folder there, your test would still be passing. So obviously, if it wasn't obvious to everyone already, you have to remove any output to make sure that your tests are consistent and they always pass. And now let's go dig into config project, because this is also a very relevant method, and I kind of just glossed over it. I was like, oh yeah, this just compiles a project. But that's not the most trivial thing. So here we are using the Spike core library, so you can see that up here. And Spike was built essentially as a JavaScript library first, and it has a CLI that most people use to interact with it over the top. But that means that you can use Spike programmatically without issue, and it is used actually extensively in our tests, because obviously you don't need to run a CLI to run your tests in Spike. And so the docs for that are here at spike.readme.io, and you can see how to use the JavaScript API right down here. And I tried to be pretty thorough with all the methods available on here, certainly more thorough than my internal code docs that I've been improving today. So if you do want to try messing with Spike programmatically, and there are a few good use cases for that, definitely go for it. It's quite solid. Let's see if anyone's bored. Okay, one person left. So professional. Okay. Let's keep it rolling. So, okay. So we're using the Spike core library here to run our compile, and you can see how it's constructed here. So I basically am taking the path like we saw earlier, getting the full path, and then we're just passing in some Spike options. And Spike, the Spike config object is actually an extension of the Webpack config object. So that is to say that all Spike configs are Webpack configs, but not all Webpack configs are Spike configs, if that makes any sense. So any property that Webpack configs take, you can give it to Spike and it will work. But Spike also decorates the config with a couple of other properties that are specific to Spike because of the way that it works. So root is one of them, for example. It gives you the project root. With Webpack, you just have to enter an entry, because Webpack will read your entry, it'll go through your requires, and it'll build your file tree from there. However, with Spike, you give it your project root, and Spike will read your project, pull down all the files, figure out how they're compiled, and then it'll feed them through Webpack's compiler, if that makes any sense. So you don't have to like manually require every single file that you want out of your entry. So this is a Spike edition here. But it still does have an entry, because JavaScript bundling is pure Webpack, so it just rolls with that. So I give this app.js in the project path, and you can see that both of them have it. Usually it's blank or test file, because I'm not really testing JavaScript bundling, but Spike will complain and warn you if you don't have a entry file. So I'll put this in to prevent warnings. Matchers here are just, this is another Spike specific property, and it essentially will tell Spike if you are trying to use non-standard extensions in your files. So Spike out of the box will handle HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. It'll categorize and parse them correctly and put them through Reshape, PostCSS, and Babel. But in this case, I'm actually using the SugarML language, which is kind of a little bit more like Jade. It's white space sensitive, and that's our defaults. And I, as well as many of the people at my company and our users, tend to prefer that cleaner syntax. So just have to let Spike know that it's going to look for this file extension. Here, this is another Spike specific one here where we're passing options to reshape. This is very relevant to these specific this specific project. And I'll try to explain my way through this because this is kind of a rabbit hole. And again, please let me know if you have any feedback, if any of this is confusing, thoughts, comments, boring, anything. Please let me know. I'll check periodically into here. So HTML, so reshape just takes an object, right? So essentially, it's gonna end up with something like this, you know. However, we have a lot of plugins. Oh boy, I really blew it on that one. We have a lot of plugins that like you probably will want to use every time, like layouts and partials and stuff like that. They're just like very, very common utilities. And so HTML standards is basically just, and you can find this as reshape standard, which is reshape standard. Yay, someone liked it. Okay. And it self-describes as a plugin pack, so it's nothing special. There's no magic happening here. It's just like an abbreviation for a bunch of standard plugins, and you can see a list of what plugins are in here. So there's retext for parsing text content. We have content for doing content transforms. Markdown is the most common one, but there are plenty of other reasons to use this. Include, which is for importing partials, layouts, and expressions, which is for template values like mustache style. And then we also include the SugarML parser by default in this package because the majority of our users prefer that. So all this, the only thing that's happening here with HTML standards is that it's just taking a couple of options that it doles out to the individual plugins inside of it, and then it just spits out a regular object that contains an array of plugins. And it looks much cleaner and nicer, and you don't have to repeat it every time. And if other people have different preferences of like standard packs of plugins they use, I definitely would encourage you to make your own plugin or fork reshape standard or whatever. It's very much the same theory as like Babel's plugin packs, right? So you have the ES 2015 pack, and you have like Babel preset env and all the different presets on there, which I'm sure you've used. This is exactly the same type of thing. It's saying like, do you really want to go through and pick out every ES6 feature and include the plugin individually every time you config? Probably not. Just use a preset instead. But there are a couple of ways to modify your presets, right? Like for Webpack 2, it handles its own ES6 module loading. So you have to tell Babel presets not to use ES6 modules, which I can show you in a little bit. But you understand the point. It's basically, this is a standard pack to save time with a couple of options to customize. So the options we're passing in are just these locals. And here we return this as a function because if I did this, it would be set to an empty object, and that would be the end of that. With the reshape loader, what happens is once the reshape loader gets hit, which means like in Webpack terms, the loader gets hit as soon as the file starts getting compiled, right? So when you're ready to compile the file, Webpack goes, all right, I'm ready to compile this. Let me see which loader matches the file. And whichever one does, I will pass the source to that loader, and then whatever it gives me back, that's what I'm going to use as the compiled file, right? So once the loader gets hit, we know it's go time, and reshape loader will take this and any of these properties that are functions, it'll call them at that point and resolve them. So what's happening here is that we have this empty locals object that we declared up here, and then we have plugins that also get a reference to that locals object, right? So in this case, we have the we've got the records plugin, which is getting inside of its config a reference to that object. It's going to mod the object before it hits the reshape loader. And then when the reshape loader comes around, it goes, okay, here's locals as a function, I'm going to resolve this, and it resolves it to the updated locals object that has your records on it. Does that make sense? Let me see if anyone said it doesn't. Not yet. I think the stream's on a delay. But let me know if it doesn't make sense, because I could try it again. And wow, this has gone on for a while, so I might get kicked out of this little phone booth soon, but I'll try to finish what I was doing here before I do. Ignore is just another standard reshape thing. When it's going through your file tree looking for files to compile, you can tell it specific files to ignore. In this case, it's a template. We don't need to compile it. And then here's the last one. This is actually a Webpack standard, and this is just a listing of plugins you want to add. So we drop the records in and pass the config. And that's our initialized Spike project pretty much. I'm going to actually jump outside and see if I can extend this meeting so I don't lose the rhythm. Let me just check. Okay, never mind. It's been it's been a shorter time than I thought. We started at 4:30, so it's only been a half hour. Okay, progress. So here we construct the new project. We've gone through all the options. Everything looks good, okay? And we return the project along with the root path to the project here, okay? And so here we're getting back the project path in the project, and you can see what's happening here is just standard destructuring with ES6. Very, very, very cool capability. I absolutely love it. You should definitely use it if you haven't messed around with it yet. It essentially just allows very smooth multiple returns, where I can return both of these variables and get them straight back without having to put them onto like a response object and pull them off the response object. This can work with arrays too. Okay, so we've got the project path back. We use this to construct the public path. Once Spike compiles, it outputs to a public folder. So that's why we return this, just so that we have, this is essentially a convenience method because pretty much every one of these tests is coming back with, sorry, let me go to one that's relevant. They're coming back with some type of verification of the compiled files. And every time you're doing that, you need to find the public path to get the file. So I saw this kept appearing and decided to add a convenience method, which is feeding back the full public path without having to make you construct it every time. And yeah, so we get the public path, which is just for pure convenience, and also for removing it after we're done. And then we compile the project. So compile project is right here. And I should have documented this while I was talking through it. Okay, let's do this right now, really quick. Okay, so given a picture, records, config, and locals, set up a Spike project instance, and return the instance and project path for compilation. Okay, and this is a string, which is path to the test fixture project. And this is an object, and it is config to be passed to records plugin. And finally, we have an object, which is locals to be passed to views. Okay, and we return a, I don't really know how to document this actually. I'm not sure if it is already in JSDoc. I feel like probably it is. You know what? Let's look it up real quick. JSDoc return. I guess, you know what? Never mind. This is just an object. I'm just straight up returning an object. It looks fancy because I've used the shortcut like this. You know, we saw that shortcut earlier. But this is just an object. The actual magic is happening here with the destructuring. So the return is an object. And it returns the project path and project. This is string, and this is Spike instance. This probably could be better, but I don't want to put you guys on too much docs. Okay, you get the idea. So given a Spike project instance, compile it, and return a promise for the results. Okay, and so here is our Spike instance, and here is our promise, which now is a native data type, so that's just beautiful. And promise for a compiled project. Cool. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, why doesn't Spike just return a promise out of its API in the first place? And let me check for comments. Okay, no comments. Whoa, more people watching. Oh my God, 5 people. Say hello, ask questions. How are you just watching this whole thing? Unless I'm just saying everything that's like perfectly fascinating to you, in which case that's great. But I definitely am not confident that that's the case. Okay, so back to the question. You might be asking yourself, why does Spike not just return a promise in the first place? And the reason is because for most use cases, actually, it would be appropriate. And it's where you're just listening for these messages here. Is there an error? Is there a warning? Has it finished compiling? But if you dig into the Spike docs a little bit, it actually does emit a number of other events other than this. So, and they're used pretty heavily in the CLI. So it will notify when like a new template was created or added, when a new project was initialized. And so it's impossible to have all those different types of events available for listening on just a promise, since promise is just resolve or reject. So I don't return a promise by default out of Spike, but it's very easy to convert a very simplistic compile call into a promise by just doing something like this. If it's an error warning, we reject the promise. If it compiles successfully, we resolve it, and then we call the compile, right? So this is just like a wrapper. It's like compile Spike project as a promise. And maybe it should say as a promise if I want to be very explicit with my methods, but you know what? Not going to do it. Okay, so that's compile project. We talked about verify, we talked about rimwrap, so that's it. That's all that's happening in these tests. And we've successfully walked through them. Now, where have I diverted myself to here? We definitely came from like way back in here. I'm glad that we walked through this. This is good, I think. But let's get back to other things. I guess first I should ask, are there any further questions before I totally change topics? Does all of this make sense? Was any of it confusing? Did you not care about any of it? D-Box is here. Tom's here. Oh, great. Look at all these people. Hello, people. Okay. Well, hit me with any questions that or comments or whatever. In the meantime, I'll just move back to the main source. And we'll talk about Webpack again, which is exciting. So, yeah, we were talking about, I remember how we got involved with this. So we were just talking about how it actually works in context of like a real life project. And so now this makes sense because we've looked at the tests, and the tests are literally it working in the context of a real life project. And so it makes sense now. So now we'll break down like where these things happen. So with Webpack, strangely enough, and this led me to much anguish at one point in my life, there are different plugin hooks for when you run a Webpack single compile and when you run a Webpack watch. So you have to listen for both of them. And I don't care if you're running a watch or a single compile. I still want it to compile the same. So what I've done is I've bound it to both of these hooks, same method. And this is just an easier way that doesn't create an extra closure. Call bind, give it the same context, pass it the compiler, and now run will execute first things first, upfront plugin hooks. And run is like my main method where we go resolve all the data and we get the data added to the locals object. And that's pretty much where 98% of the magic happens. So this type of plugin, along with many other types of Spike plugins, it'll just be like you're binding to the same type of thing. You're like, I want to put something in the locals, so I'll just do it in run and watch run. And there actually is a shortcut method for this. It's nobody said anything. More people are here. Wow. Okay. It's in static dev / spike util. I found myself using the same pattern over and over. So it is run all. Here we go. Run the given function when Webpack's compiler initialized, bound to both run and run watch runs. So you can do util.run all if you would like as well. And that would just look like util.run all, and it would be that. And I wrote run and because I know how to spell, and it's really cool at times. So I could replace that with this, and would the test pass? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out soon enough. Moment of truth. Nope, they all didn't pass. Compiler.plugin is not a function. Oh my god. I wonder. You know, it's possible that I didn't install everything correctly. Because compiler.plugin should be a function. But we'll see. Okay, either way. I guess what I should do is revert back and see if it passes. Because if my tests were never passing, then we are really in a whole different place. And that's where you get to see real life development. Okay, in the meantime, this is of little consequence. So let's dive into this actual method. So we're binding compiler as the first option because we need to use it to get out some of the options. So the Webpack compiler object has all of Webpack's configuration and options on it. And so a lot of the time we need to access those. So I'll just pass it through to this function. And we definitely do in this one. And then for every compiler plugin call, whatever function you pass to this, Webpack will pass a couple of things to that function. And these are the two things that Webpack passes. So I bind the first argument only, and then Webpack will fill in the rest of these two arguments. And this is the callback of like, okay, I've done what I need to do, which is good that it exists because we need to make async calls. But not all Webpack plugin hooks have this async completion thing, so it's a little confusing. But if you look through their plugin docs, they'll tell you which ones do and don't. And then compilation is like another place where you can put plugins on. And we'll see where it gets used later on the line. So let's run my tests, see if we're passing, because we were passing last I checked this project. Okay, nice. So maybe I actually blew it with this, right? Let's see. Yep, okay, I guess I would not advise using that method. And I will take another look at that one and make sure it's fixed and it works well. Promise. Compiler.plugin is not a function. Very strange. You know, I'm just so curious. I want to look at it now. So let's do some debugging. Here we are in the source, and we'll go to run all. Here we go. Compiler. Very strange, very strange. Oh, I guess I need to pass compiler to it. Okay, all right. All right. So if I do this.util.run all, yeah, that was good typing. Okay, we do compiler, and then we do our ret function. And that should do it, hopefully. All right. Okay, so there's our first successful refactor. Amazing. Cut one line of code. But you know what? It was already sitting there in util, which we're using, so might as well put it to work. Okay. Oh, nice. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. That's cool. All right. So we know when this stream is going to be over. No more feedback. No more people. Okay, we're going real stable right now. Okay, so let's see what I can get through in 10 minutes. And if this was fun times, I'll definitely do it again because I've been enjoying this, and maybe this will get more people to contribute to some of our plugins, which would be amazing. Okay. So here we are in run. We get the compiler, we get the compilation. These are both Webpack things, and we get the callback. So first things first, I need to go and pull out the options for the plugin and figure out if the person has passed in data, URL, or files, and make sure the data is resolved from each of those things. And so data is the easiest one because it's just data, and you can see that render data is obviously a very complicated function that does literally nothing, except for just pulling the data property off the object. But it's still here for consistency because everything else is a render function. The URL, okay, let's go down here. This will call REST, and REST is up here. It's essentially just an Ajax library. It's made by the same people who make Hwen.js, which is a fantastic, very functional Promise library that I use a ton and really enjoy. And we'll get into the weeds with that shortly. But it essentially will just resolve a URL and give you back the response. So it just calls the URL, and then it will parse the response as JSON because it is a requirement that you return JSON at the moment, and nobody has requested a XML parse, so hopefully that won't happen. And when it does, now you know where you can make your pull request right around this area. Okay, so that will give you back this, and render file, nothing too surprising. It reads the file. It joins the file path to the root of the project, which is important because it allows you to use relative paths when referring to your file, which is nice. And then it will do the same kind of deal. Give you back the content, JSON parse it, and you're good to go. People are being so loud outside of shit. Okay. And this node.call is essentially just promisifying the fs read file, which typically gives you back a callback. But I want to use promises here because this whole flow is kind of built on top of promises. And using a read file async is much better than using a sync one, which will lock up your thread. Okay, so that's good, that's good, that's good. We get back all of the data and we add it to tasks object under the key of whatever key you passed in for your data. So keep in mind that what you're doing is this kind of structure. So you put the key that you want your data to be on in your views, and then you put your config inside of here. So ideally, you want to get back in your views, test, an object that has test and then has like the data in your file, right? So my goal is to take this, read that source, and then replace this entire thing with the data from that source, right? So I actually do need to hold on to these keys. I can't just do the resolving of the data and pass it in because the data needs to be scoped to those keys because you can require multiple different things, right? You could have a bunch of different objects that resolve from different URLs, and frequently you do need to do that. And so we need to hold on to the keys. So what I've done is made a new empty object, and I'm holding on to the key from here. You can see I'm looping through this .ops, which is an object, and we render it, but we stick it on the same key. So at this point, we have successfully achieved the transform we're talking about here, which is replacing this with its own data, because we took a blank object, put this key on it, read that data, and then put that data in as the value, if that makes sense. So that's all we're doing here, and now we have this task object, which is actually a bunch of promises for data because we haven't actually necessarily resolved anything, right? This is a promise that we returned here, and so is this. So what we have here is the key, and then either the data, if you pass it back here, like the pure data, okay, or a promise for the data, okay? So we have like test is, promise here. We have test2 is like some data, right? So that's the kind of object that we're working with right here. What we need to do is make sure that all of the promises that exist on this object are resolved. And that's pretty much it. And then we need to pass it right back in. And there are a few other features here that we run as well, which we'll go through. But this is the core of what we're trying to do. We have these promises. We know that we're going to get this resolved data. But for whatever keys we do have, we need to make sure all of those are resolved. And then once they're completely done, they get added onto the locals object that we passed in, which is, let's see, origin to locals, which is the add data to property, if you recognize that from here. So that's our object that we pass back into our views. So we need to resolve all of those promises, and then we need to just tack it on to that locals object, and then we're done. We finish up the hook, and we call the webpacks function that says we're done with the hook. All right, cool. So let's see if anyone has questions. Okay, no questions. 8 people, oh my God. Obviously, the longer I do this, the more people are gonna watch. Fantastic, okay. There's gotta be a better way than to keep checking this window, but I'm obviously a streaming massive amateur, so we'll figure that out for next time. If anyone knows how to do this, please tell me, because it would be great. Okay, so here's our working object full of promises. And this is something that is like a side effect, right? So I don't want to talk about this yet because it's breaking away from our mission here, but I'll come back to it, I promise. It's not relevant to actually resolving the promises. So we have our object with promises, and then we pass that into a method called keys.all. Okay, and this is probably the most confusing part of this project, but it's also one of the most incredibly efficient parts of this project because it's some serious promise wizardry. And keys.all is essentially a method out of when.js, and you can see it's required up here as when.keys. I thought I was so clever with that, but it caught me. Okay. And what it does is it takes an object that has keys of whatever you want and values of either promises or values, and it resolves all the promises, and it returns a promise for an object that has all of its keys, values, promises resolved. Okay? I will repeat that one more time because it's confusing. All right? Keys.all takes an object that has keys of whatever and values of, it could be a promise, it could be a string, it could be another promise here. Oh boy, I really blew it. Okay. And this is, a number. Okay. Obviously, fantastic code here. Tremendous code. No one writes better code than this. And it will go through this object and it'll resolve all of these and it'll replace them with their values. Get some more values. And it will return that object, this finished and resolved object, as a promise to its next step. Okay? So this is literally exactly what we needed. And it just happens that when.js has it. And to dig this stuff out, I want to show you, because I do this all the time, and also check if there's comments, which there aren't. Oh no, someone left. No. Okay. You go to when.js API, which I obviously have been to a lot of times, but you can just go into this from their README. And they have all these methods in here, and they're great. And really, if there's anything you're possibly trying to do with promises, the answer is in here somewhere. So I go down to objects, I see when keys, okay, keys not all. And it says turns a promise that will only resolve once all of the items in object have been resolved, which is cool. And the resolution value is an object containing the resolved key value pairs of each of the items in object. And if any of them is rejected, it will return as a rejection of the first rejection value, which is just what we want. So it's good. If you enter in a URL that returns HTML and JSON can't parse it, it will reject the promise of that error, and you get that message nice and clean. Oh man, I'm running out of time. Oh my god. Okay. What is my meeting? Oh man, yeah, I do have to go to that meeting. Okay, maybe I'll continue this after. I just want to finish this one flow, and I'll be like 3 minutes late to the meeting. Okay, so we have all these resolved objects. Now we have this whole transform deal. And what this is essentially a feature where it's in here in the README. If you have any data and you, for example, want to run a specific transform on your data before it comes back, like for example, some APIs will be wrapped in like an object that's like success true or whatever. Like, here we go. Like this guy. This is our carrots staff API. So here you can see that this wrapper, result true, code 200. Like I don't care about any of that. I just want to get this array back. So instead of in my views having to always go, like staff.data, and iterate through that, what I can do is do a transform that just returns the data to me straight up. And that can help. It's just helpful for a lot of situations. So that's a feature that we add here. So the next step is to take our resolved data and essentially run the same type of thing, but just put it through the transform functions if they exist. And that's what this is testing for. If it doesn't exist, it returns it. If it does exist, it returns the result of the transform function of the data. Very straightforward. And then next we merge it into the locals object, which, as you've seen earlier, very straightforward. We have the add data to in our options for the plugin, and we essentially just object assign our data to it. That's it, done. Because we have our fully resolved objects, we're just tacking right on. And as you know, objects in JavaScript are passed by reference, and so this will update wherever this object is used, which generally pass by reference is not the best thing ever, but in this case it's very helpful. So that's that. And then finally we do some weird thing here, which honestly I couldn't tell you what this is doing, and while I could figure it out, I now don't have the time to. Let's just do this. Oh, this is for the templates later. Okay, we'll have to talk about the templates because that's complicated too. But so we do something to deal with the templates, and then we're done. We're good. So that's how this plugin works. And some of the juicier stuff is dealing with the templates, because that's where we start talking about writing out data to custom templates individually, and we talk about having to use the loader context again, because you pass your reshape config to Webpack, but now if we want to compile it ourselves with reshape down here, we still need to use the same config, etc. So there's some exciting stuff here to talk through, and if anyone's interested in it, I'm very happy to do it. Maybe we can do it later today once my meetings are over, or I could do it another day. But unfortunately, I must depart now. I will delete this garbage code. Thank you so much for tuning in and checking this out. I'm so glad that even a couple of people were interested, and I definitely am going to do this again. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, just hit me on Twitter, and I will answer them as best I can. I hope this has encouraged people to jump in and contribute. I hope that you have learned something today. I hope that you'll be able to tell me something dumb that I did so I can learn something today. But thank you so much. I love all of you guys, and this video will be recorded and available later. I'll put the link on my Twitter and obviously into the Spike Getter room. So if you want to come review any of it again, that's cool. Yeah, and I think that's it. So thanks again for tuning in, and I'm going to stop the stream now at just about 1 hour on the dot, and we'll see you guys next time. All right.